everyone for joining us. Look, my plan this morning is to go through a sort of a beginner's run through of xLights. It will be fast paced. There's lots of content to get through. You'll likely want to watch it again later. I will post the video. It will take a day or two to get it processed and up, but I will post the video so that you can watch it back again. It's generally going to be at a beginner level. Obviously, there's not a clear line between beginner and advanced and everything else, but I will be deliberately not going into some things because I consider them to be more advanced topics, and pretty much everything in the software is covered in one way or another on a video somewhere. So I am going to try and keep it at that beginner level. I'll also generally focus on the non-obvious more than the obvious. I'm not going to burn a whole bunch of time going through every single effect, every single setting. There are other ways for you to get that information. I will instead focus on the things that for a new user aren't necessarily intrinsically obvious. xLights as a sequencer is the Photoshop of the sequencer world. It's incredibly powerful. There's a lot that you can do with it. My personal view is it stands head and shoulders above many others in terms of the types of shows we put together and the capabilities. The downside of that is it's got an awful lot in it and it can be hard to navigate, and when you're a new user it can be doubly confusing. And I recognize that, and I want to try and point you in the right direction for a few things so that you can find some stuff. I'm not going to do the real basics. I assume you found the download link, you've installed the software, and you have at least flicked through. You may not know exactly what you're doing, but you've at least flicked through things. By all means, if you have questions, ask questions. I'd ask that you do them first of all through chat. Stuart will be looking at what comes through in chat, and if necessary interrupting me, and we'll cover off some things. There's so much to go through that I won't necessarily always think of every obvious question that you might have, so feel free to ask. If Stuart thinks it's an advanced topic, then obviously he's not going to interrupt me and we'll just keep going. So obviously, xLights is free software. It's open source. For those of you who want to actually play with the source code, you can find the source code here. Where's my mouse gone? On GitHub in Smeagol xLights. You can get to that via the xlights.org page. The source code for xLights is all here. Our official issues repository of bug reports, etc., is also located here. So if you have an issue, etc., it is one way to get it properly logged, etc., and probably more likely to be fixed if it appears up here than if you just raise it in a Facebook post or something else. But yeah, we are open source. As such, you're not obliged to spend $1 on us, and that's cool. However, there are out-of-pocket costs, etc., and if you do want to contribute towards the project, you can do so. There is a donations link on the xlights.org page. If you go to that page and scroll down a little bit, there's a donate button here. You can choose to donate if you so wish. If you're using it for commercially, then I think it's good karma to do so. It does help offset some of our costs. We do have web hosting costs, the Zoom room, etc. we contribute towards. We also acquire hardware for development and testing, and one of the reasons why there's so many controllers that you can upload to and all that sort of stuff is because we do go out and acquire hardware to test with and make sure that xLights works well, and most importantly, it keeps our wives off our back. It's no longer just that thing we waste all that time on. Okay,
hey, just got a couple of questions just to go over what you're going to be covering regarding setting up Pis and Raspberry Pi caps and stuff like that. You're not going to cover any of that today, are you?
I don't have a Pi. I do have a Falcon control. I haven't turned it on, which I will do. I'm going to run away in a second to turn that on because I should have turned that on. I will show you. I will show you how to do it, but because I don't have one actually set up, I'm not going to be able to actually demo it live. But
Okay.
let's see what I can do.
The other thing is mapping singing trees with LMS files. Another one was still using AC panels and xLights with AC
So
stuff.
I will definitely cover AC stuff. I recognise that a lot of new users are coming across from something like Law and they want to know how to do AC, so we will definitely cover off that. The bringing across of a Law singing faces sequence and turning it into xLights, I'm not going to go through that in detail. There is a video that I can point you to that does show you how to do it. There's some stuff I will go through around importing sequences. I don't plan on going through the whole Law importing thing in detail. I'll sort of, wave it past you so you can actually see it, but I'm not going to go through it in excruciating detail. There are some videos out there that do go through it. I'm happy to point people towards those as well. But
Okay,
yeah,
that's all there is. Yep.
definitely will cover basic AC. Now I'm going to take just 1 second. Let me just quickly go and turn the Falcon on before I forget. Okay, done. All right. So before we get going and starting to talk about setups and layouts and all that sort of stuff, let me do a quick run through of the options. I've done a more exhaustive video on this, but I think it's important that you get your settings right in xLights to make sure that you get the best out of xLights. So let's start with the settings menu. There's a couple of settings here that I think are really, really important. Render on save, for God's sake, turn it off. You don't need to render on save. Generally speaking, xLights will keep everything up to date. If you do desperately need to render everything, click the render all button and do that. Definitely have the save FSCQ on save, have that turned on, don't turn it off. It'll give you a nasty warning if you try to turn it off. It's a bad thing to do. Backup on launch, I would generally turn on. That means when you start xLights, it will back all your key XML files up. And that means you can always go back to where you were at the beginning of your session. Backup subfolders, definitely turn this on. Make sure that is turned on. The only other ones that are really important here, I would generally turn off model blend default to off. Model blending can be a little confusing at times, particularly if you're importing some older sequences where we didn't have model blending. So I've generally turned that off unless you really need it on, and you can turn it on by sequence, so that's okay. In the view menu, I would definitely have, if you're coming from Law, I would definitely turn on the xLights toolbar. You're probably going to want to use that from time to time, so turn that on. And for the perspectives, I'd set the auto save on the perspectives, and that just means that every time you exit xLights, it will save where everything is on the screen automatically. And if you load someone else's show, so when you're doing an import or something, it'll make sure that all the screens are still set up the way you like them rather than the way they like them. So auto save for me is a pretty useful option. Particularly if people's stuff is, they've got multiple screens and you don't, etc. The only other settings that I would worry about, and because I don't have a sequence open, these things are all disabled, but each one of these panels have this reset panel when changing effects. There's a checkbox up here on the layer blending. There's a checkbox here on the color. There's one up here on the layer settings. I would make sure that all of those are turned on. Otherwise, what happens is some of these settings are inherited as you move around in sequence, and it gets very confusing very quickly about why some things are happening. So I would definitely turn those on. All right. So let's start. And although xLights opens up here on the setup tab, I would generally start with the layout tab. But before that, you need to set your show folder. I would be sure, notice how my show folder, I've set up this beginner seminar. You can have as many show folders as you like, and every show folder gets its own network definition or its own setup definition, its own layout, and so on. And so I can have anyone's show that I can load up. But notice how, although I've put a date here into this particular folder, my show folder itself is called show. And I would always make sure that you do not include a date in this last folder in the chain. You can have as many dates and things up here as you like, but here, do not include a date in the name of that folder. And that means as you move from computer to computer and year to year, all of your links to your files and everything else will continue to work. The other thing I would mention is that in your show folder, and here's my show folder that I've created for today, make sure that everything that you're going to reference in your show sits either in this show folder or in one of the subfolders underneath it. So if you're going to use a video, put it in a videos folder, or put it in here if you really want to, you don't mind cluttering it up. Your audio, I would put in a subfolder. Your images that you're going to use, I would put in a subfolder. If you're going to import someone else's sequence, if you're buying one, an xLights sequence from someone else, or you're buying a holiday sequences, superstars sequence, or you're importing a law sequence or whatever else, I would create an import folder, and you can put your stuff into subfolders under here, etc. The reason that becomes important is because during the xLights process, you are going to start creating links to these things. And when you create links to things, if they sit in folders that are neatly underneath your show folder, all of those links will work. You can copy your show folder to another computer, you can put it into a Dropbox and use it on multiple computers, and everything will work perfectly, even if it's a Mac and Windows or whatever else. But if you put it elsewhere on the hard disk, then as you move from computer to computer, or even worse, if you put a year in your show and then you create 2019, all of those references in the sequence will be looking for everything in a 2018 folder in 2019. And as long as you've left your 2018 folder there, everything will be good and you won't know. And then when you delete your 2018 folder because you decide you don't need it anymore, all of your sequences will break. And so you really don't want to be doing that. So make sure that this folder here, the show folder, does not have a date in it or anything like that. So good practice. All right, so when you start using xLights, the setup tab, to be honest, until it comes time where you want to actually try to output lights from xLights to a controller, etc., you do not need to put anything on this screen at all. You don't need to go and create a large block of null channels that some people tell you to. You don't need to create a bunch of universes. None of that is necessary. You can just totally ignore this tab and skip straight to the layout. What will happen is behind the scenes, xLights will actually create you channels that all of your props can sit on. So you don't need to spend your time mucking around with that. In terms of here, the first thing you're going to want to do here is you're going to want to set yourself generally a background image. You come over here. So if you click in the background, even when you've started to do things, if you want to edit the properties, just click in the background here. These properties will come up. You'll need to choose an image. You typically grab a photo of your house. I'm a big fan of using a photo of your house which happens to have lights on it. This is a very old picture of my house. This was largely before I did pixels. The beauty of it is it's often easier to see the outline and everything, and it also means you know exactly where all of your elements are going to be. And so when you start to lay things out, it's a lot easier. You can play with the image size here, so I can make this a little bit larger maybe, and maybe a little bit higher. I don't know. Maybe I can go a little bit higher again. Okay, and obviously the size of your screen, you can start playing with this. If you've got a really wide property, then obviously your image is going to be proportionally smaller. If you've got a corner property, you can take two photos, stitch them together and use that as your image. At the end of the day, this is the position from which my show is going to make the most sense. When I do a wipe across the house, this is where, if you stand here, this is where it's going to look best. And that's why it's here. Now, a lot of people actually don't even use a background image at all. They just put all their props on the screen in random places. They sequence on the props. They don't do whole house effects, and it works fine. But a lot of people do choose an image like this. Now, obviously, this is going to change when 3D comes out. 3D is not out yet. It probably won't be out for another month or so. It's making good progress, and it is available to download if people really want to do that. But yeah, I think for the vast majority of people, it's going to be another year at 2D, and maybe 3D is one of those things that they will play with next year. The other parameter here is the brightness. I would generally turn the brightness of my photo down to say 30%. It makes it pretty dim, but it means when I start to drop my props on it and my models, etc., it's going to be possible to still see what was underneath, but it's not going to wash out my props when I do so. Whenever the save button down here is red, that means that something's changed and I want to save it, and you can save it regularly just by clicking on that button there. All right, so let's start with some of our model types up here. So when it comes time to start putting your models down, these buttons up here are the things that you're going to use. Now, if you click them once, you can come down here and click and drag and draw a tree, etc. And having done that, you can then just move it into place, resize it, etc., using these sizing bars and so forth, and get it exactly right. If you're going to be dragging and dropping a lot of trees, you can come up to here and click twice on the tree, and that means that I can now go and drop multiple trees just, and I actually have a big tree that sits here. And when you want to get out of that multiple drop mode, you just click the button again and it goes away. So I actually have a tree that now sits here. Now I can move my trees into position. Okay, looks good. Now, as you start to drop things down, you're going to want to start to fix up the properties and get all of those trees to be set up correctly. And this is where this panel here starts to come in, where it starts to list out all the various properties of your models. So you take something like a tree like this. Now, from memory, this tree is 18 up and down strands. There's actually 3 connections back to the controller, I think. I think there's 3. Actually, no, there's 1 these days. There's 1 connection back to the controller, and it goes up and down 18 times, and there's 19 pixels per strand. So, of course, my math's horrible. At least 18 times 19 is not a times table I remember. There you go, it's 342 pixels. So let's set that one up.
Okay, just a quick question. How important is it to have your model placed exactly or close to where it is in real life?
So as I said, it depends. If you want to be able to put a wipe on your house or a pinwheel on your house and have everything look like it's in exactly the right place, it's important. If that doesn't matter to you, if you're going to largely sequence at the model level where you put an effect just on each individual model and you don't care about how they're sequenced relative to each other, then it doesn't matter. You can just stick them all in a line at the top of the screen if you want. In fact, at that point, I wouldn't even use an image. It's just not necessary. But for a lot of people, they like to lay their props out according to how their house is going to look. And the other beauty of that is you can then go and record a video of it and share a video of what your show is going to look like before it's even up and running. Okay, so the properties of the tree. So here are all the properties of the tree. Now, there's a couple of really important ones here. This is a 360-degree tree. It goes all the way around. Now, in practice, my trees aren't. My trees are actually 270 degrees. You can see it from most sides, but no one is ever at the back of my tree. So I don't bother putting pixels there. I use the Boscoyo strips, so you can't really see through the tree. So there's no reason to put pixels right at the back of the tree. It's just a waste of pixels. So I set it at 270. The number of strings, as I said, there's only 1 connection back to the controller. So I put a 1 here. Doesn't look much like a tree now, but that's okay. As I said, there's 340 actual nodes on that string. So it's quite a long string. And there's actually 18 strands per string. And so now it looks like a tree again. Okay, and that's how you should correctly set a tree up. The number of strings is the number of connections from your tree back to your controller. The nodes per string is how long each of the strings of lights are that are attached to each one of those controller connections. And then the strands per string is the number of times you zigzag up and down each string on that tree. The starting location is bottom left. What that means is at the back of the tree here on the left is going to be where the wire comes in. If the wire came in on this side and went back around this way, that would be bottom right. Obviously, I don't do it from the top, although I'll show you one of those in a minute. They're the key elements. That's enough to describe what that tree looks like. Each one of these trees here is actually set up exactly the same way. So one of the things we can do, I can hold the control key down and select these all. I'm going to delete them. It's going to complain. And let's go and paste a few of these. Now it's complaining because it had set everything up with model chaining. And as a result of the model chaining, because I deleted some things, the model chain got broken. A very quick way to fix that up here, given that we don't have any sort of special controller setups, is just to come up here, right click, and make all start channels valid. If I click on that, and click yes, it will fix it all up. It fixes all the broken chains and gets everything working again. So let's copy and paste this back. So we've put our 3 trees back in. I'm just pressing Control C and Control V to copy models and paste models. So there they are. They're all back again, and they've copied the properties. So they're all one string, 340 pixels, 18 up and down. Perfect. All done. Let's quickly do this tree here. This tree is not actually a round tree. This is actually a ribbon tree. In this case, I actually have 4 connections back to the controller. Oh, sorry. Actually, 4's correct there as well. I have 4 strings back to the controller, and each string is 600 long. So that's my my tree there. So it's a flat tree, 4 strands, each one 600 long, each one zigzags up and down, which makes, of course, 16 actual strands on the tree. It's a pretty classic flat tree design. Now, the only thing that's slightly quirky about this is it starts actually at the top left. Because my controller's all set up here on the balcony, my wire comes here in here at the top left and goes down the tree and so forth across the tree. So pretty simple to set up a bunch of trees. I have a star at the top, so let's whack the star at the top. There it is there. Now, I can't actually remember what this is, but let's assume that it's definitely one string. I'm going to make it 90 pixels long, but it's actually a multi-layered star. It's not 90 pixels long. It's 40 pixels on the outside, then 30, then 20 pixels. And so that's how you can create a multi-layered star. 40 pixels on the outside, 30 in the middle, and 20 in the center. All right, so it's a very simple way to create. So you don't have to create a custom model for a star. Some people have gone and tried to find the Boscoyo models for their star props. One of the reasons why they're quite hard to find is because, generally speaking, you just generate them and you're all good. Now, when you are building something like a star and you're punching pixels into things, etc., be very aware of how the prop is actually assumed to be wired, because that makes a big difference. If you get that mismatch between your actual wiring and the way it's defined in xLights, you're going to have a world of hurt. And so if you come in here and right click on a model, there's actually a menu here with a whole bunch of stuff in here. One of them is the wiring view, and the wiring view shows you how the pixels are wired. And so you can see that the first pixel on this prop, and this is actually viewed from the background, the first pixel on the prop is assumed to be in the crotch of the star, and it goes out to the legs, and then it goes around. So it's important that you know how a prop is modeled. One of the other cool things in the right click menu, if I select all of these props and right click, is this lock setting. And what that does is it locks my properties, my models in place. So if I click on a prop and I try and drag it somewhere else, or I try and resize it, it can't be done. So once you're happy with where your props are on your display, I strongly suggest you lock them in place and save yourself a hole, because what will happen is, particularly once you get these overlapping props like this, you know, you'll click on it and you say, oh yeah, that's the one I want to move. And then you'll click again and it swaps over to the other one. And now you're moving this tree and you're moving it back. It's a pain in the backside. When you are working with props, you can also press the Control-Z key and that will undo any action that you've generally taken. So it'll undo where you've moved things and so forth. So pretty straightforward. Okay, let's throw some arches down. So let's drag an arch out. You can see that when you get the arch flat with the ground, you get a red line across the bottom if you want to make sure that it's exactly parallel to the bottom. So here we've got an arch. I've made it really big because I'm going to play with it, because I can come up here and if I want, and I can actually make this 4 arches and it will actually shrink it back down and stretch it out. Nodes per arch is 50, so this is actually 200 pixels spread across 4 arches. And so forth. Now, if you've got an old AC arch, let's imagine you've got an old AC arch. I don't know, let's make it 8 segments. Each segment's got a string of AC lights on it. What you can do is you can come up here and you can say, let's imagine it's an 8-segment arch. You can put 8 here into the nodes per arch. And then you can say, oh, look, put 20 lights in. So this is going to be 8 controllable sections, but it looks nice and full because I've put the 20 into the lights per node. And this is where you're going to, so this is AC. So one of the other things that you will need to play with is you'll need to come down to string properties. At the moment, it says it's an RGB string. You're going to want to come in here and make it a single color string. Now, by default, it's single color red. I would generally make it single color white, and I would always sequence it with white, but you could do it with red if you want, just to understand that it will only react to effects that have this color in it, because it's white. It'll pretty much react to anything. There's also single color intensity, which will also react to anything that you might drop on it. Whereas if you made it single color red and then you dropped a blue effect onto the arch won't actually do anything because blue doesn't contain any red. Whereas if you drop some yellow onto it, the red arch would still do something because yellow from an RGB perspective actually contains some red. And that's generally how xLights works behind the scene. So that's how you would create a segmented AC arch if that's what you were trying to do. All right, what else have we got here? So some people ask about polylines and single lines and how should you outline your house. I'm a fan of using polyline for a couple of reasons. One is it's much more flexible, and 2, it lets me have a single prop representing a single run of strings. So for instance, if I grab that and do polyline, I have a string of lights that starts here, comes across the front of my eave. I click, it drops a point, it comes up to here, it comes back a bit to here, goes up to here, goes across to here, and then it comes all the way down to there. Now, of course, it keeps going. When you're done with the polyline, just press the escape key and it will stop trying to drag in extra points. Now the green dot here is as it says here, that's the starting location. My controllers are all on the balcony, so this is where I start this particular string of lights. Now, this has taken 50 pixels and stretched it out over the entire length. In reality, that's not how it's set up. But you can click this individual segment section here and you can come in here and start to define how many pixels are in each segment. I don't remember what it is, but let's imagine it's 60 across the front. Maybe it's another 50 up the first ridge. The next one's pretty short. Let's imagine it's 14. The next segment is, I don't know, another 20, I don't know, 7. A very short segment here, there's maybe only 5 pixels across the top there, and then down the back there's another, I don't know, 89. And so that's how you can lay all of the right number of pixels in each segment of that correctly. All right, so that's the polyline. There's some other cool stuff you can do with the polyline. Sorry, grab that one. This arch, in fact, let's do my arch around here. So if I start down here, which is where it does start, I come up to here where it starts to arc over. I'm going to jump straight across, which is not how it actually goes, and then come back down to the bottom and press escape. You can actually come up here and click on this segment so that you get this pink line. And then if you right click on it, you can define a curve, and then you can grab these red connections and you can actually arch the lights or arc the lights around and try to actually map it. They're Bezier curves, so getting them right can be a little bit difficult. But that means it actually looks like my arch. And again, I can come in here and have individual segments, and I might have, I don't know, 20, 10, and 20 for a total of 50 lights going around that particular arch. So the polyline is incredibly powerful. Do remember the start channel. I generally draw my polylines from where the string actually starts, and I use the green square as the starting location. You can swap it around. You can say, actually, no, it's the blue square that's the start, but I would generally, like I said, draw it in the direction that it actually goes. Which other ones here are worthwhile talking about? Like I said, I'm not going to go through them all in detail. You can also download. So if you're getting your props from someone like Boscoyo, we do provide a download feature up here. You click on the arrow, you draw roughly the size of the prop that you want to download. Because I'm here and James is over in the States, it takes a little while for it to all download, but in a second I get all of this here. And now I can go through and choose my particular prop. I can click on it, it'll show me an image of it. This is actually the wrong image, but I do use this one, so I know about it. And I can just click insert model when I'm happy with it, and it will download it from James's website and insert a custom model, all pre-done. Now, don't forget, jump into that wiring view and understand where the wiring starts, because you're going to want to make sure you follow the instructions here and wire the prop up. The snowflake is quite clever in the way he jumps over holes and comes back, and that way you don't actually have to cut your string of pixels at all. This one here's got 96. Now, in fact, it's got 95 because I built this thing, so I'm going to have to fix that one up. But you can finish your snowflakes off, make them the right size, and then put them into place. And then you can cut and paste them if you want. Now, when it comes to custom models, let's spend a little bit of time on custom models because we all have them, we all need them. The model data section here, this is where you go in and actually define the layout. If you click the minus button here, you can make it a little bit smaller so you can actually see it. Now, this is a pixel prop. This is how James has set this thing up, which means all the numbers here, which you can probably not see now because I've zoomed out, are all unique. And so this is the number of the pixel that goes all the way around to 95 and so forth. Now, this model's actually wrong. It turns out, because I've got these things, that pixel 24 does not actually exist. For some reason, he left it off. Now, this creates a problem because it now goes from 23 to 25. But if you right click here and compress it, it will renumber everything. And so now the model's correct and I'm ready to go. So that's one way to download a model and take a look at its data, etc. You can also create your own custom prop. So you click the custom prop icon here, you draw it, you get this nothing in it because we haven't defined any pixels. We can then come into here. Now, in this case, there's a policeman image I've got, so I'm going to browse, grab my policeman image. So this is a static prop. This has just got dumb pixels on it. Obviously, that's pretty small. I'm going to want to make that a bit bigger. Let's make it 25 wide by, I don't know, 40 high. So it's a lot bigger. It's an interesting bug. Didn't realize that. Okay, let's go back out and go back in. $25 and $40. Looks good. We'll browse. We'll put our policeman in. Our policeman doesn't want to come in. Why does our policeman not want to come in? Let's go back and do him again. Let's set him here. There he is. 25. No, it's something to do with that. If I go back to 5, no. All right, it's got me confused. I'm going to spend a bit of time on that one. So let's do it slightly differently. Let's see if doing it the order makes a difference. 25 by 40, he looks good. Let's come in here, set the image now. There he is. All right. I'll have a look at that. All right, so you can see here's a dumb prop. What we need to do now is we need to go in and number all of those pixels up. Let's imagine that this is just a dumb AC prop, a single channel. We either turn the lights on or off. So the first thing I would do is I would turn the image brightness down a bit. It does interesting things to the image brightness. I'm not sure why. And in this case, what we want to do is we just want to click and drop nodes. Now, because this is just a dumb prop, every number is going to be a 1. So we just run around and click along the outline where we want xLights to draw a node on the screen. Because it's dumb, it really doesn't matter how many we put in. We can put in as many or as few as we want to outline the particular prop. Where are we? I'm all over the place here. Not being particularly careful. And so everything's a 1 because the whole prop is just a single channel. If it was a pixel prop, you would obviously need to increment the numbers as you went around, and I'll quickly show you how to do that in just a second. Okay. Well, that's the messiest outline I've ever made. Do we need to show that? Maybe use belt. Now, because we're not actually going to sequence this in any way other than turning on or off, it doesn't really matter how many I put in place, but you can see he's nicely outlined. And I can stick him into my yard if I so want to. Now, if I wanted to create another one of these but make him a pixel prop, I'd do it slightly differently. Again, I'm going to go in and make it, we might make him a little bit denser because we're going to make him a pixel prop, and therefore locations start to matter. So let's make him 40 by 60. We'll come and we'll set our image again. Come back in. So the matrix is a little bit denser now. We'll make it a little bit smaller so we can see the whole thing on the screen. We'll turn down our image brightness. I'm going to fix that because I don't like the way it colors it. Now, when we set this, we need to set active and we set auto increment. Now, with auto increment, every time I click, the number's going to go up. And that kind of matters, right? Because you're doing pixel nodes, and so it matters. We also need to think about, well, where is the first pixel on the prop? So if it's down here on his foot, I click here, it's put a number 1 in. You know, that might be number 2. I don't know, maybe that's number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And you can see that it just automatically increments. Now, if you make a mistake when you're doing this, I don't know, let's imagine I accidentally put it here and I think, that's not right. I'll click there and now I clicked again, it's gone to 20. I'm in all sorts of problems, right? So just quickly turn this thing off. Click on here again, get rid of the number. The last number that you had successfully was 18 here. So change this to be 19. Put it back on again and then resume clicking and it will continue to put the nodes in and we'll get all the way around. Now I'm not going to do the whole thing here, just do a couple more, enough so that when we're done it shows up. And we click OK and you can see there's one side of him done as a pixel prop. So he has multiple channels, and if you come up here and you look at his definition up here, you can see he goes from channel 10,318 to 10,407, whereas the previous prop, he's RGB nodes, but he's a single channel, so he shows up as 3. But if we wanted to make him a single color, just on or off, we'll just do that. And now it's just using a single channel, 10,315 to 10,315. Single channel, maybe one of your law controllers or something is turning him on or off. Okay.
Keith, just got a quick question about polyline.
Yep.
You know, on your normal standard models, if you drop them, you've got the red line to say that it's perfectly horizontal. Is there such a thing with the polyline?
I'm pretty sure there isn't. No. With a single line there is, I think. Even with a single line, I'm not sure there is. No, there's, yes, there is. Just for a second there, it went red. There, so hard, so hard. But there are ways you can do it, right? So let's say I'm really, really serious about this. This thing has to be perfectly straight. You can come down to size and location, and what you will find here is all of the numbers clearly laid out here. Now the Y location is the thing that would need to match. So Y1 is currently set to 60.51 and Y2 is set to 60.13. So I could copy that 60.51, paste it in there, and I can now tell you that line there is perfectly straight. So if you're very, very obsessive about it, let's say this is flat as well, right? So that's, so the last, so X7, Y7 is going to be this one here. So we want Y5 and Y6 to be exactly the same. You can see they're not quite the same. So I can, again, cut and paste it and straighten it up if you're really obsessive about it and you need it to be exactly straight. Of course, you're the only one who is. The people watching your show didn't even realize that they were all in the right place either, or even that your show was set to music. So I encourage people not to get too obsessive about these things. There's a lot of work that you can do without necessarily a big payback at the end. Where was I? So we've downloaded a model, we've played with it, you've seen some of the tools there. The right click menu, there's lots and lots of things on here. We haven't created groups yet, we'll do that in a minute. One of the other things that's sometimes useful on here is to understand the layout of the model when it comes time to use it. And one way you can do that is to right click on it like this tree here and bring up the node layout, and you get this sort of representation of how xLights is going to see that tree when it comes time to sequence it. And you can see that it basically, although the tree is a nice round shape, etc., xLights internally just sees it as a matrix and is going to treat it like that when it does the default buffer for sequencing. And we'll come back to that when we get into the sequencer. All right, let's quickly grab all of that and lock it all into place. So the next thing that you're probably going to want to do is create groups. And there's a couple of ways you can create groups. You can come up here, right click and click add group, and then you have to put all the models into it. Or you can come over to here, there it is, and grab all the trees, for instance. Let me grab that tree, is it? All right, we'll just add these ones. We can add the other one in a second. And you can right click and say create group, and I can create a group called trees. And so it's created a group icon up here with trees, and you can see that it's added those trees in. I've accidentally grabbed the polyline. We obviously don't want that, so we'll take it out. And I missed tree 5, so I'm going to grab tree 5 across and add it in. You can see everything that's in the group because they're highlighted in yellow. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now, you may want to put them into order. You can do that simply by dragging and dropping the things around to reorder them, or clicking these up and down arrows. The order that the models appear in the group has an impact later on when we come to sequence it, and you may care therefore about what order they're in. Now, technically you can put groups inside groups and all of that sort of stuff. It will work. Some people do it that way. You're probably more likely to come across bugs if you go that way, but it does work. You can see up here as well the contents of each model as well. Now, so what else is there? So a couple other things I want to quickly touch on. One is submodels. When you get a prop like this snowflake, and I'm not going to go through this exhaustively, there are some really good videos out there that go through submodels at some depth. But submodels is a way to take a particular prop and break it up into smaller subsets of that prop. Unfortunately, snowflake's probably not the ideal thing to do it with because it gets very complicated. But the way you would do it is you would come here and you would add a submodel, and let's just do the center. Let's just create the center as a submodel. And what you can do is you can come around here, and if you hold the mouse over it, you can see which pixels are in it. There's also this thing called select nodes, which Scott's just added in the last release, which needs a little bit of refinement, but and this won't work this way in your version because I'm actually running a version that's slightly in advance of yours. But I can just go and in this case, I can just double click these nodes. That's coming in the next release, and say, yeah, these are all the nodes that I want to have in that center circle. And I click OK. And unfortunately, in this case, it goes and it creates a whole bunch of lines. If you click on the title, it will show you all the nodes selected that are now in that particular submodel. We want to create a way that you could just create them all onto one particular line. That's just not built yet. That'll be out in a release or two. I can bet on it. And so by creating submodels, you can actually start to sequence portions of a model, not the whole model, and you can do some pretty cool stuff with that. A lot of the models that you will download will actually have their submodels defined, so you don't need to go and necessarily create them. I actually have that snowflake elsewhere with a whole bunch of submodels. One of the places that you can find those, some people have shared them in the Facebook group, and there is the Google Drive out there, which also has some people that have shared their xModel files. An xModel file is simply created by right-clicking and exporting the xLights model, and it will include any submodel definitions that you might have created on your model. And then you can import those using this import button here, which will import that xModel back into xLights. The last thing that I want to show, let me throw a matrix up here as well. I do have not a hugely dense matrix, but I do have a matrix here. Now, defining your matrix is something, again, you need to get right. In this case, I have 3 strings because I have 3 connections back to my controller. Each string is 300 long, and it folds over 6 times. So it's 18 high. It's actually not 300. It's 12 less than that. So it's actually 288. It's 48 wide. It's a Boscoya chroma mesh, but I've cut it down a little bit because there wasn't enough room on my house to fit the whole mesh in. So slightly smaller. One of the things you can do when you've got something like a matrix or a P10 panel is you might want to put some singing faces onto that. And in order to do that, you do need to come into this faces property. You need to add a face definition. Let's add in a snowman face. Because it's a matrix, we'll need to go to the matrix element. And there's also a download option here. So if I click on download, I can come in, find the snowmen. And there's a bunch of different snowmen here. As I click on each one, it downloads an image and shows me what the snowman's going to look like. Actually, this is the snowman I like. My matrix, like I said, is not very dense. So this is a nice low resolution image. So that's good. I'm going to click insert face. It downloads all of those images. It places into a folder under my subfolder, under my show folder, and that will be ready for when I want to put a snowman up on my matrix. I will now be able to do that. Now, if you've got a singing face element, maybe you've got, where's his singing faces? Hearts. I have no idea. Other props, maybe he's in here. Where does he put his singing faces? Oh, here, singing elements. There we go. All right, so here I can grab one of these, insert that model. Okay, so this is a pixel prop, so it's not a matrix, it's a pixel prop that we're using for a singing face. You also do those singing faces using the singing faces property. Okay, he hasn't included the singing face, which is a little bit frustrating. So we can come in here and we can say, we'll call this bulb. In this case, it's going to be node ranges that are going to make up the face. We generously give you a little image of what the mouth looks like, and now you need to just go in and choose the appropriate elements. So the face outline in this circumstance might be all of these pixels that go around the outside. Now somewhere down here will be pixel 1. It probably ends somewhere around about 69. So yeah, so I can come up to here and say, look, what bulbs 1 to 69 are the face outline. And they are, so that's the outline of the bulb. The eyes open. The eyes open would generally be, so 155. It's going to take a bit of time, 160, 161. So 155 to 167. Maybe, yep, that's the eyes open. And obviously it would also be the other eye, 146, 152, 146, 142. So it's 154. I have no idea what this one is. 142, I know, let's do 142 to 155. So if you just put a comma, you can put another range here, 156. No, it can't be that, 152. Well, that wasn't very successful. So I need to take out 143 to 145. So I'm getting there. It's 154. Still not there. 7, closer. No. That's 141 is the problem. 139. 139. So like anything, it's kind of fiddly to set up, but you can go through and set up the node ranges. You do a similar thing with the mouths where you choose which of these pixels in this mouth you want to make to be each letter. When you get something like this WQ, you know, you can actually use portions of the mouths to create smaller parts of the mouth. It's quite flexible. But you'd go in, you'd define all of these things so that later when you want to do your singing faces, it knows how to display each one of those mouth shapes onto your bulb. I'm kind of staggered that there's not a download that actually has all the mouth definitions in place. I would have thought that they would have been there. Maybe the hanging bulb has it. Let's have a quick look. No, it also doesn't have it. It's pretty useless. All right. When you normally share those X models, they would include all the face definitions. So there is also some stuff available on the Facebook group, but I'm not going to go hunting around there right now. So that's how you set up your faces. Is there anything else I wanted to go here? A couple of things. You can actually resort this. You'll notice here by default things are sorted alphabetically. If you click on the start channel column, it will organize things in start channel order. Because we haven't bothered with, well, which prop's actually connected with each controller, we've just used a lot of what we call model chaining, where each prop just starts at the first channel after the previous prop. When it comes time for us to set up our controllers, we're going to want to tie those particular props to a particular controller, and we'll need to go in and set the start channel property here to an appropriate value. But right now, when you're first starting and you don't really have your pixel controller set up, you may not have even built your props yet. You're just playing. There's no need to do that. Just let it all chain. Do your sequencing. You'll be able to watch what your sequence looks on the screen, and you can worry about setting up all of your controller configuration, etc., later when time comes. So at that point, we've got a little bit built. We can jump over to the sequencer tab. 7:57 an hour in. Okay, we're not doing too bad. To create a sequence, the new sequence button here will do that. You can choose to create an animation or a musical sequence. I'll quickly go through both of them. If you click the animation button, in fact, if you just click the done button, it will automatically create your 30-second animation sequence. If you choose to click it, you can come through to here. Most people sequence at 50 milliseconds. Some people, particularly when they're doing singing faces, or if they're very fussy about fades, etc., will want to sequence it at 40 frames a second. That will double the size of your FSCQ file and the like, but otherwise it should be fine. I'm going to do 20. If you're, and we'll come back to this in a minute, but if you're very fussy about the ordering of your models in your sequencer, you might want to come in here, and instead of saying all models, you might want to choose a view here, and we'll come back and we'll do that again in a minute because we're going to go and create a view. You may want to come in here because this is an animation and say, well, actually, I want this animation to be 60 seconds long, not the default, which is 30 seconds long. You can also come into timings and add yourself some timings here. So I might decide to create a metronome timing, which will create a timing mark, let's say every 5,000 milliseconds, which is 5 seconds. And I'll click done. And so it's created me a nice metronome timing track up here, which I can select, and it creates me a timing grid that's every 5 seconds. So I can do some sequencing on it. That's an animation. You can see it's a minute long. It's pretty straightforward. We can save our sequence. We can give it a name. All good. Now, let's talk about views, because views can be quite useful, both in terms of getting some control over the order in which things are rendered. The rendering order of things matters because particularly when you have groups, the way in which xLights works is the models are rendered from top to bottom according to the master view, and this is the master view, which means any effect that gets dropped on a tree in this trees group here is going to render before something that's dropped on one of these individual trees that happens to be part of that group. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that if I come up here and put a collar wash on all of my trees, and then I put a butterfly on an individual tree underneath, and I come back, you'll notice that the butterfly takes precedence over the color wash. The color wash is still being rendered on this tree, but then the butterfly is overriding the data. And so that's why render order can matter. Now, the way you control that is if you right click here and bring up edit display elements, you'll get this panel here. And what it shows me here is everything that's defined in this sequence, and this is the master view is the one that we're looking at. Now we can add extra views, so I can come up here and say I want a singing face view, and this can be really useful when you're doing singing faces. So you can see there's no props in the singing face view at the moment. So if I was to come back to here, and here I've selected the singing face view, all my models have disappeared. If I go back to master view, they're all there. If I go to my singing face view, I don't see anything at all. So it's like a filter, so you can just see the props that you want to sequence, and you can put them in any order as well. So in this case here, for my singing faces, I'm going to grab my chroma bulb here and bring it across. And maybe I'm going to grab this new timing track. So that's the thing I'm going to put my lyrics onto, let's say. And so I can bring those two across. And so if you come back here, you can see now the singing face view has my bulb and my timing. And this is quite powerful. Oh, it docked. Did it dock? Where did it dock? Tools. Okay. You lose everything, you can always come back to Windows and reset everything back to its defaults. And now I can bring it back up again. There we go. All right. You can also create I'm going to go and create my preferred master view. I think it can take spaces, but let's not put spaces. And this allows me to do something like bring everything across and then reorder everything. So if you right click here, you can do things like sort it. So sort it by name, but put all the groups at the top. Generally speaking, groups at the top make sense. I'm pretty happy with that. You know, I might want to come in here and say, well, actually, no, this star is on tree 5, so I want to bring it down and place it there. And so you can drag and drop it down and move everything around. That's also possible. Now, if you're playing with display elements, it does actually make your layout dirty, so you might want to come back here and save it so the next time you create a sequence, it's all good. So let's close that sequence and let's go back and recreate it. Save it, that's fine. Let's go and create another sequence. This time, let's create a musical sequence. And so you click on the musical sequence. You will need to pick an audio track. So we pick an audio track. We pick a frame rate. Now, you can now see that these views have been populated in your drop down. So if I want to put the models in the order of my preferred master view, if I select that option there, that will automatically make my master view my preferred master view. So everything will be in the order that I prefer. I've had a lot of people say, oh, I don't know how to do this. I can't get them in the right order. I have to keep on going, shuffling them all around. But if you create a preferred master view and you select it here, everything comes through in that order. See our stars above tree 5, exactly where we want it to be. Our singing face view is still there, so we can sequence that. Everything's good in the world. Okay. What else have I missed? There are a couple of things I missed on the layout tab. Let me go back. There's just a couple of things in my list of things I wanted to talk about that I didn't get to. So let's quickly go back to layout. There's just 2 or 3 things I want to cover. Floodlights. Some of you will have floods and you want to represent floods in a way that floods look like. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. The old school way is to create a single line that represents your floodlight. Obviously, it doesn't look much like a floodlight, but if you come over here, we'll call this flood, except there's 2 O's, not 2 D's. It's one string. There's only one node because a floodlight's just a single node. And if you come down to the string type, it is an RGB node, or maybe it's an RGBW or whatever. Yes, three channel RGB will be fine. But there's also another set of properties here called appearance. So if you come in here and make that, I don't know, 22 large, we can turn this into an actual full circle. And you can also have a blended circle. And in fact, let's make that a bit bigger. Let's make that 52 big. And you can see that this actually is now starting to look like a floodlight. You could make that as big as you wanted it to be. Maybe your floodlights are a lot larger. And that's a 3-channel prop. So when you click on it, you can see here in the thing that it starts at 13,508, finishes at 13,510. It's using up 3 channels. That's an RGB floodlight. If it was just a white floodlight, then again, you would change this to be single channel, single color intensity. Again, now it's only using a single channel. Pretty straightforward. The other way to create floodlights is to use the DMX model, particularly if it truly is a DMX flood. You would come up to here, you would say it's a floodlight, and it will automatically draw it like a floodlight. You can come in here, say it's only 3 channels. My red channel is 1, 2, and 3. And now you can sequence it as a floodlight. The disadvantage of using the DMX model is that it will only respond to on effects and color wash effects. It won't respond to all the regular other effects, which is why this is still commonly a method that people use to set up their floods in their display. And if you've got a string of floods, which I do, you can again do the single line, and you can say 1 string, 8 floods. You make them, in this case, you would make them RGB nodes because you want 3 channels per node. Again, you would come down to here, you'd set it nice and big, set it to blended circle, and now you have 8 floodlights all connected together that you can sequence. So that was floodlights. We've talked about AC lights. We haven't talked about AC trees. There's a couple of tricky things with AC trees. In fact, there's a couple of things with trees that we haven't talked about. Spiral trees, let's do that first. One of the things that you can do with, if you want to create a spiral tree, you would generally set it to 1 string, although maybe you have 2 strings in a helix type shape. 1 string, 50 of them. And if you want to make spiral wraps, you can say, look, this wraps around 2.5 times, and you can create a spiral tree with a single string. If you made strings 2, you would get the double helix type spiral tree wrap. So that's how you create spiral trees. If you want to create an AC tree, maybe you've done spirals of AC lights. This is where it gets a little bit difficult because we don't support it perfectly. But you might have, I don't know, 6 strings, each one wrapped around once. You would set it to single channel, and this might be your red string, so we'll set it like so, single color red. And then what you would do is you could copy and paste that tree, create a second copy, place it slightly offset on the first, and we might come in and say, well, this is actually, I don't know, maybe this is my purple string. Okay, and you would basically overlay your 3 strings like that. That's one way to create a multicolor tree. It's not as clean and as nice as pixel trees. That's just the nature of xLights. Because of the way we try to handle colors and everything internally, some of these things are a little bit harder to do. If this was an RGB tree, i.e. a dumb RGB tree, it gets a little bit easier because there you can say, I've got 5 RGB strings, spiral wrapped around 3 times, and I can come down here, and rather than RGB nodes, I can use RGB. And so now there's 3 strings of dumb nodes that you're controlling in that particular tree. So hopefully that's the bulk of the questions around that. Very quickly, even when you don't have a sequence open, you can use the tool's check sequence option. What it does is it goes through and this is the file that it produces. It does a bunch of checks on your show where it goes through and checks to see that everything is okay. And, you know, in this case, it's giving me errors, etc., because in this case, I've forced the IP address and it's not my IP address. And I've got a whole bunch of models defined that I haven't actually configured onto a controller yet. It's telling me that I've got some model overlaps going on here. We might need to fix those up. So it does a whole bunch of very detailed checks, and that's well worth getting familiar with, because it's going to find a bunch of problems for you. So yes, we do. Here we have an overlap here. So I'm just going to right click here and make all start channels not overlapping. Okay. All right. Hopefully that's fixed that up. All right. That's sorted by start channel. Looks good. Now, if we have a sequence open, which we do, notice all of those new trees that I just created have not appeared here, and that's because when we created the sequence, those models didn't exist. If you want to bring those models into the sequence, again, right click, go to the edit display elements, and you'll see here they all are over on the right hand side, and we can either grab individuals or we can move them all across and place them into our sequence. And so now they've all been added down here on the bottom. Notice where there is these things here where you have this colored square. That's because that's a single color string, and so the colored square tells you what color it's going to respond to. So yeah, I think that was it for the layout. Did I miss anything else? Dropping one, dropping lassoing. Yeah, I think that's good. All right. So let's go back to our sequencer. So here we've got our audio track. Now, some people like to want to break that up and create timing marks to align things with the music. The beauty of those timing marks, is that it lets you easily drop effects to line up to various elements of the song. You can do this quite easily by coming up here, clicking here to play, or clicking the play icon up here, and as the song plays through, you can press the T key, and every time you press the T key, it's going to drop a timing mark down. And so you can manually set the timing. If you zoom in here and you realize that your timing's not that great, you can actually drag these out and realign them with particular features in the song. So timing marks can be adjusted once they've been dropped. With timing marks, I would generally recommend, if you can't drop a timing mark exactly on a feature in the audio, because xLights, you can see that the timing mark kind of jumps, and the reason it jumps is because we only allow you to drop a timing mark where a frame starts and stops. So if you can't drop a timing mark exactly where you want, I would always suggest you drop the timing mark slightly early, not slightly late. And the reason for that is when you're playing your show back, it actually takes a very small amount of time. And generally speaking, each one of these is a 20th of a second. So it takes a bit of time for the data to be output to all those controllers, for the controllers to read the data and then push the data out to your pixels. So generally speaking, if you're going to go anywhere, you want to go early, and that allows that data to get all the way out to your pixels right on the beat of the song. If you go late, then your song's going to look always slightly out of time. The same thing goes with lyrics. If you're doing a lyrics track and you're setting all of your words and phonemes, etc., in place, you're going to want to make sure that you go slightly early on a word rather than slightly late on a word if you can't go exactly on a word, because it will look better when you do your show. Your lips generally do move slightly before the sound comes out. So again, it makes sense to go early rather than late on things. If we get time, I'll come back and show you how to set up lyrics in Singing Faces, but there are some great videos out there that go through that in real detail, and there is no way I could do justice to it in a few minutes in this particular thing. You can also generate timing marks. So if you've gone and installed the Queen Mary plugins, if you go to the xLights download page, there's these QM Vamp plugins. There's a 64-bit and a 32-bit installer. If you install the 64-bit version, it doesn't work, then you may need to install this Microsoft Visual C++ 2015. Oh, notice xLights hasn't crashed. That was my bet time. Damn it. All right. I could crash it, but I won't. Sorry. Yeah, so you can download and install the Queen Mary plugins. They'll get installed into C program files, Queen Mary plugins. And that can be used for some audio analysis. So I've got those installed. If I right click on new timing, I can add a, oh, no, sorry. If I go up to settings, sequence settings, timings, I can click new here, and there's a whole bunch of different types of timings. So earlier you saw we had 50 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, metronome and empty, but now there's all these extra ones. And the reason there's extra ones right now is because this is an audio track, and because it's an audio track, I can start to use the Queen Mary plugins to try and detect beat changes, note changes, etc. in the music. I think generally creating beat type timing marks is a bit excessive. There's way too many beats in a song for you to be chopping and changing your lights on every beat, but bars is often useful. So you just choose the beats and bar tracker, the bars option, click OK, click OK. It analyzes the music, it's done, and you can see now that it has created timing marks for each of the bars in the music, and it's done that through an audio analysis. So you can see the beginning of the song, there was no audio, so it didn't start it. It started it when the music started, and it chased it on through. You can see that these seem here to be a little bit closer together. Maybe the tempo of the music changed, the bar shortened or something. That's entirely possible. The challenge with the Queen Mary plugins is that they are effectively trying to reverse engineer what's going on out of the audio track itself. It's an extremely complex process to execute. It's never going to be perfect. You may want to then go in and start to break it up. My preference, and I'm not going to do this, but my preference is actually to manually create a timing track here and actually, spot key changes in the music. There's clearly something that's occurring here. If you right click, if you click and drag here, you can select that portion and we play it. Right, so there's a big beat that goes on right there. And so I'm almost certainly going to want to press T and put a timing mark there, because that's the perfect time to change an effect when a big beat occurs. Maybe I just want to do a pulse. Maybe I want to change the effect that's displaying on the sequence at that point in time. Lots of options. So creating your timing track is really important. Now, you don't need to create it all up front if you don't want to. A lot of people, though, will spend their first few minutes to hours with their sequence going through and creating their timing tracks, because sequencing becomes an awful lot easier once you have a timing track to work with. You can share timing tracks. If you're really happy with your timing track, you can come up here and export your timing track. It will create an X timing file, the same sort of file that you use to share lyric tracks, and you can give that to someone else and they they can say, well, look, it's my own display. I want to do my own sequencing, but I'd really like to leverage your timing track, and you can share them and reuse them. Okay. I wish I had a timing track for this. Actually, I'm gonna go and cheat. Sorry, I'm going to change to my show folder. File. It's not there. Change. Documents. Load help. My lights. Home. No. Actually, that was probably not such a good idea. So I have this sequence kind of done. This is actually based on a slightly different audio file, so the timing track is not going to be perfect, but you can see here that I've got several that I've created. This one here is kind of, it's not consistent, so I might want to export that particular timing track. Save that there. Yep. Okay, so let's go back to our original show folder. Discard changes. No. Okay, now I'm going to create that new sequence. I'm going to actually, though, go and choose the audio file that I use in my show, because like I said, it's slightly different. I actually recut it much more shorter. I cut something out of the middle of the song. Where is it? Why can't I see it? Oh, there it is. Yeah, we'll take all the defaults, and then I can now go and import that timing track. From this folder. There it is, and it's brought that timing track in, and now I can reuse it. There's a nice long slow section, so I've got a nice big separation, and then as the beat changes, these are the music phrases as it goes through. Now, sequencing is simply a matter of dragging and dropping effects down onto the show. I'm not going to go through in detail, listen to the music over and over again. It's painful to watch, but you can just grab an effect and drop it down. The effect properties allow you to change, in this case, for instance, the number of spirals that appear on the trees. If I increase it, I get more of them. So you see more of them. You can change the colors up here. Let's do a quick run through of the actual settings on each of these panels so you get a feeling for what's there. So this panel down here has the settings that are unique for the type of thing that has been placed onto the prop. So if I come up here and put a pinwheel on, I get a set of settings here that are very specific to the pinwheel. Whereas if I go up and click back on the bars, I get the settings that are very particular to the bars. These three panels up here also have settings that impact on the rendering of that particular element. But in this case, these settings are generic and apply across all of the effects that we're going to drop. So you need to be familiar with both. Now, all of these settings are applied to the effect. Although they're shown on separate panels, they are effect specific, and you can change them by effect. The color one, let's start with the color one. Up here, you have the set of colors. You can change these colors. If you left click on the color swatch here, you can go in and say, actually, I want that color swatch to be orange. Once you've customized this, you can click the save icon here, and it will save that color swatch with that particular color order. I can come back to here. What was that? It was blue. So let's go and make that blue again. I can save that color swatch, and now you've got multiple color swatches in here that you can switch between quickly as you do your show. So you might have a Halloween one, you might have a Christmas one in here, but you might have dozens of these and it'll just keep extending and displaying all the colors for you. Some people don't realize this, but you can actually right click on the color swatch as well, in which case you get the gradient dialog and you can either load a predefined gradient or you can come up here and change it and make it your own. You can click on an element, you can delete a particular color, you can move them around. If you double click on this line, you can go in and change that color. You can change the type of thing. In this case, it's a gradient, but you can also just make it a change over time type thing. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do with the gradients. Again, you can also export these and share them or allow yourself to reuse them at other times. When you do that, the gradient, the color here will change as well. You can also save those, and if you look there, the gradient is actually there saved as well. So you're not limited to purely static colors. You get to decide whether a color is included or not by checking on it. So if I want, in this case, I want one of my stripes to be that gradient, and you can see if you look very carefully that what it's doing is it's actually changing the color over time. So that this stripe here that's moving across now, it's slowly changing color over the course of the effect according to the color gradient that we set. Now, you can see this little clock underneath here. That's telling you that this is a color gradient and it changes over time. You can also cause it to change over space. Now, a better way to do this would be, to be honest, use something like the on effect on a single, well, no, not on that tree. Let's go put it on my matrix. Always best to look at an effect on a matrix because it really gives you a feeling for what it looks like. So you can see that in this case here, I've got the clock has turned into an arrow, and you can see that it's laid the gradient out across the element from left to right. If I click again, I can change the way it's applied. When it comes back to clock, again, you can see that the gradient is changing over time and moving between the colors. Now, different effects have different uses of this. So for instance, if I was to drop this instead with a pinwheel, I was to increase the thickness of the arms, increase the size a little bit so it covers the whole thing. Give it some other colors so you can see it. Maybe not red because I use red. You can see that one segment of it is changing over time. It's moving between the colors of the gradient. Again, though, you can change it. So here, the gradient, bring that size in a little bit. You can see how it's applied the gradient from the center outwards, center inwards, but you can also place it, apply the gradient across the segment as well. And so each of the effects to varying degrees, all of them pretty much support the timing gradient. Some of them support the spatial gradients as well. So it's just another one of those things that you can play with. Below it, you have things like your sparkles. Your sparkles just create sort of flickering white spots within your effect. So, and you can also have it reflect the music. So if you click that checkbox, the sparkles, number of sparkles will change depending on how intense your music is. The brightness is probably the only other thing that people will play with, where they'll set the brightness up or down on a particular effect. These other settings I won't go through. The buffer settings are also somewhat interesting. I'll start with the big black box down here. By default, when you drop an effect, it will fill the whole buffer, but it doesn't need to. You can actually say, actually, I want that to only fill part of the matrix. There's also, if you right click, there are a bunch of predefined settings for, the center third or the middle third, etc. This can be really powerful if you want to put 3 singing faces onto a matrix. You can divvy it up this way, or you can create submodels and do the same thing. There's also an oversized thing, which basically renders a much larger area. And there are a couple of situations where that's useful, but I won't go into that as well. And if you double click here, it just restores it back to its default. So you can always get it back to where you want it to be. Render style is really powerful. It's an advanced topic on its own. There are a couple of videos out there, and I'm going to go through some videos later and point you at them. But understanding render style is the type of buffer that is created that the effect is rendered on. Behind the scenes, xLights sees everything as a matrix. In this case, obviously, the matrix looks the matrix that it's rendering on looks exactly like the matrix here, but it doesn't need to. There are other options, like this is the same effect with a single line buffer. And that looks kind of weird, right? There are definitely some effects though that look pretty cool when you do that. So if you were to come up and drop a butterfly on here, that's a normal butterfly. If you make it a single line, you get an interesting set of colors flowing across. And the reason for that is what it's done is it's taken all the pixels, and instead of having a grid that is the size of the matrix, it's stretched that matrix out to be a long single line of pixels going all the way across, and it's then dropped the effect on it as if that's what it was. So that's like dropping a single line, a really long single line, and so the butterfly looks quite different in that circumstance. This becomes really important when it comes to something like groups, because the number of buffer styles goes up dramatically, and some of the really powerful ones are the per models. So the per model ones creates, basically it's as if you dropped the effect that you dropped on the group on each individual model at the same time. And so it's like a apply this to multiple models type buffer style, which is quite powerful. The other thing that can sometimes be useful, and we often provide multiple ways to do things, but let's throw a fire effect onto our grid here. You can also transform the grid by doing things like rotating it. So here we've rotated the matrix 90 degrees. So now the fire looks like it's starting on the right-hand side and coming across. You can also rotate at 180, and now the fire is coming from the top of the model down and so forth. So there's a lot of manipulation that you can do on the buffer to change the way an effect gets rendered. So it's kind of like it's option on top of option. And this is one of the things that makes xLights in some places hard to use, because there are just so many things that you can do. Over here on the layer blending panel, there are a couple of things I want to highlight. So one is the fade in, fade out. So if this fire effect, when you play it, it's immediately on. If you wanted to fade it in over, let's say, a second, you could put a 1 in here. And if you wanted it to fade out at the end, you could put a 1 in here. And so now when we play the effect, it starts black, it fades up. The effect runs for, well, in this case, it's going to be a long time. So let's shorten it up a bit. So the fire goes up, it fades away to black, it starts and loops back around. So that's how you can fade effects in and out. It's not the only way you can do it, but it's a common way that you can do it. The other thing that this panel offers you is the blend styles. And these become important when you start to layer effects together. Now, I'm not going to show this in detail. There are some really good videos on layering, but you can actually create multiple layers here. You right click and insert layers, and you can actually, now to move an effect up and down here, you use the keyboard, the up and down arrow keys. You can't drag them. You can drag them left and right, but you can't drag them up and down. But I can come in here and I can put a spirals above this. Right, and you can see that because they're on 2 layers, it actually blends the 2 things together. So the fire's in the background and the spirals are on top. And this is the default blend style, the normal style. But there's a huge number of others here where, don't like that, where you can use one effect to mask out another effect, or you can take the average of the two and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can blend effects together, and you'll often see people do some pretty amazing things on trees and the like, and usually it's because they've got multiple layers and they've been playing with these blend styles here, and changing the way the various effects combine together to form the final resulting effect. Couple other things that I want to touch on quickly. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of the settings here. I encourage you to play with them. One of the other things that you can do is roll the dice, and when you roll the dice, xLights will randomly choose a different set of settings across everything, which means you can end up with some really interesting outcomes, and you never know, we might end up with something that's kind of nice and we can then keep it. When you do find something you like, you can go and highlight the effects. If you right click and bring up effect presets, you can actually create a new preset and say, I don't know, we'll give it a name. You'd obviously give it a much more descriptive name. And now I can at any point in time go over to here and say, actually, let's drop that effect, and it will drop that effect back down. And so you can build up a library of nice effects that you like to use over and over again. You can organize these into folders. Again, you can share them. There are some vendors out there that will sell effects to you. The only thing I would caution when you're buying effects is recognize that some effects work differently depending on the size of the model that they're applied to. So you need to be sensitive. So if someone's said, oh, look, I built this effect for 128 by 128 matrix, which is probably a P10 panel or P5 panel, then if you don't have a panel that's basically that same size, those presets aren't going to look spectacular. Now, they may offer them with multiple dimensions, but there are other effects that quite frankly scale reasonably well and you won't have a lot of problems, or you may just need to tweak a parameter here or there and you'll be all good. So that's that. Okay, let's come back to this one. The other thing that you'll notice here, and you may want to play with, is these little green arrows. These are your value curves. In this case here, you know, it's set. We've set the parameter, and it's static. Hang on, let me get rid of that pinwheel. So the setting is static, and so in this case I've set the spiral wraps, which is kind of the angle that the spiral's at. It's very constant, but you can play with that and actually vary that over time, and there's a bunch of preset type things that you might want to do there. And so now I've got a value curve, and all that's doing is changing the value of that setting over time. And so in this case, what it's doing is it's changing the angle of the wrap over time, and so it makes it look like the wraps are going backwards and forwards. And there's a lot of parameters here that you can actually put these value curves on. You click it again, it comes off. You click it again, you come into the dialog here. You can change these settings. There's also a custom mode here. And when it's in custom mode, you can click and drag and move these things around and define your own curve. If you go back to something like a parabola or something, once you go to custom, it will hold everything in place. And now you can go and customize that as much as you like. So value curves can be quite powerful. What else is there? Right-click menu. Now, particularly if you've done something like import effects, and I'll quickly show you how to do that in a minute. One of the things that you can also do is lock effects in place. And so when you click on them, they come up with the red bar in the background. This is really powerful because it stops you being able to accidentally move the effects. So if you've imported a bunch of effects from someone else and you don't want to touch their effects, but you do want to add some things on your own, something useful to do is to lock those effects in place so you don't accidentally move things around and break the sequence that you've imported. There's also a bunch of alignment tools in here for effects which allow you to move things around, lock them. There's cut and paste and everything in there. One of the things I didn't show you in layout as well is that there's actually alignment tools in here as well. So if you've selected multiple models, you can come up and align things and distribute things and make them all the same size and all of that sort of stuff. Now I can't do it here because I've locked them all in place, but that's also possible when you're doing your setup. Another thing you can do that's not necessarily obvious to people. So here I've got a group of trees. If I double click on this, it will actually show me the trees. We did create a submodel also on our snowflake, which was what, custom, I think it was our custom 2. Was that our snowflake? No. Oh no, this is a coma flake, that's it. So if you double click on it, remember we created a submodel called center. Well, here's that submodel, and I can now drop effects on just the center of the snowflake. Okay. Something else going on there from a spirals perspective. Let's move it aside here, get rid of that. So you can see that this is only putting the fire onto the center of the snowflake, which is kind of powerful. So that's how you use your submodels. You can also click all the way down to the node level if that's what you so want to do, and see what's going on at the individual element level. That can be really powerful because it actually will show you the data on the node level. When it renders. So if I was to throw that down, actually I think I've got a setting turned off. There it is. So you can actually see the data that color wash is going to render across each of the channels on that particular DMX effect. You can do the same thing on the matrix. You can see here's all the data that's going to be rendered onto the node level as a result of those effects that have been put down. So double clicking is also useful. What else have we missed? Oh, okay. So another thing that can be kind of useful is, if you remember rightly, I think let's set this back to something sensible. Spiral wraps. Movement, we'll set that movement back to something more acceptable. Okay, so I think, yes, I'm fading the fire. I think I'm fading the fire in and out. Let's get rid of it. Yep, so I'm fading that fire in and out, but I'm not doing it to the spirals. Let's imagine I wanted it to do the spirals as well. One of the things that I can do is I can select both of these effects. I can come up here to my fade in, fade out, and if I right click here, I can do a bulk edit, and I can say I want them both to be a fade in of 1. And now when I click on the effect, the spirals also fade in. And so you can select all your effects here and come up and say, look, I want to set here all the sparkles, I want to set that to 24. And so as I click on each one of these effects, they've all now got sparkles turned on and all set at that 24 value. So bulk edit's a really powerful technique for making bulk changes to the same setting. Now, obviously, these 3 panels here apply equally across all effect types, but if I select all of these and I come down here to spiral wraps and bulk edit that, that's obviously only going to apply to the spirals effects. It's not going to apply to the fire effect, etc., because that property doesn't exist on those elements, even though I had them selected. So bulk edit's extremely powerful. That's new this year. I think that's...
Can you just show how to do a bulk edit on color change?
Okay, sure. So let's say we wanted to change, well, fire effect doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's throw a pinwheel in and I don't know, that. All right, so new in 31, we've changed slightly the way this update button works. So let's imagine I want to change all of these effects to a totally different color palette. I'm going to change this to be, I don't know, let's do something really radical. Orange, an olive color, cyan. And I grab all those three colors and then I click the update button. And what that will do is that will apply those colors to all of these effects. So my pinwheels, those colors as well, and my color washes, those colors as well. It won't apply any of these other settings, just purely what's up here in the color space. And updates all those effects that I've had selected. Now, if you want to do something advanced, and I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, but there is in the view windows, there is actually a select effect panel that you can bring up. And this, you can actually use this as a way to actually select, say, all of my fire effects. So here I can come up and I can say, so all the models, effects. Oh, what have I done?
Just search for the models first. So put like that star in there in the search bar.
Oh, that's right. I got to, yes, I got to say I want all models, right? Oh, dot star. All right, so we select all the models. I can say I want the fire effects. Okay. And so what that's done is it's selected all of my fire effects. And so now I can come over to here and bulk edit, change my hue shift. And if I come and click on all my fires now, you can see that the hue shift has been applied on all of them because I did the bulk edit. So the search, it's a little bit odd up here. This uses a thing we call regular expressions. It's a very powerful search mechanism, but it's a little bit awkward to use. But dot star will basically select all of your models, but you can also go in and say, I'm only interested in my tree, and it will find anything that happens to have tree 2 in it. Oh no.
You have to click the search button.
Oh, right. Okay, there you go. But you can also say tree.star, and it will give you everything that has tree in it. All right, so a couple other things I wanted to show before I wrap up, because it must be getting late. 15 minutes left. The tools menu, there's a bunch of tools up here that are worthwhile. Actually, we haven't talked about controller setup yet, and I did promise I would do that. Okay, so let's do that. So with all your layout, you now need to get your data out to your controllers. And the way you do that is by describing how you're going to get your data to your controllers. The vast majority of people are going to use E131. If you're sending your data over the network to a controller, it's generally E131. If you're using something like a DMX adapter, like a DMX dongle, or a LAW dongle, you're going to probably want to use an add USB or maybe an add LAW for the LAW specific protocol. But the vast majority of people use E131. If you've got a DMX, a DMX attached to your Falcon or your xLight, etc., you will generally use the E131 and you will do the protocol conversion on the controller itself. To do that, you come in and you add E131. I would generally recommend unicast. There are very few circumstances where I'd recommend multicast over unicast. You want to set your controller IP address in there, a starting universe number and ending universe number. I like to start in blocks of 100, but I only allocate as many universes as I actually need on that controller. Although the Falcon will support 96, there's little reason for me to put 96 universes because very few people would actually use that many, and it just means there's lots of data. Now, if I just click OK now, it's going to create 30 rows representing each one of these universes, but I can click the one output. And what that will do is it will create a single line representing those 30 universes. And that means your screen doesn't get as cluttered here. So that's kind of neat. Now, When it comes to your props and now putting all of your props on your controller, now's where that start channel starts to become important, because you need to make sure that everything is properly lined up. The way I would do that is, let's imagine this tree is on the first output of my controller. I would generally come into here, you click the ellipsis, WS2811, that's the type of pixel that it is, and it's on port 1 on the controller, and there it is. Let's imagine that this second tree here is also on port 1 on the controller. They're daisy chained together. This is a Falcon 16, so I can do that. So again, I'll make it on port 1. This one here is also on port 1. So they're all daisy chained together. That's pretty good. And this one here, let's imagine this one's in a separate port. This might be port 2. The tree here, he might be on port 3 on my controller. The string of lights might be on port 4, and maybe my polyline is also on port 4, although actually no, let's imagine he's on port 5. It wouldn't be that convenient to get there, and the snowflakes. Now this is actually this is going to be a problem. So it's a couple of things I've done wrong here. So if we right click and look at the node layout of the tree, you'll actually see that it's actually using controller connections 3 through 6. It's not just using 3, which is the one we told it to use. And the reason for that is because we've said that this tree actually has 4 strings. So it's going to need 4 controller connections to drive those strings. So I actually need to put this on 7, which I can just do there. And then we'll put this one on 8. And we'll put this one here. Now you can type it in. You don't need to go into the dialog if you don't want to. My caps lock's on. And then this one here, what was that? It was 11, was it? 9. Let's put this on 10. Okay. And you'll see this is also a multi-string one, so this one's going to use outputs 10 to 12 on the controller as well. So you need to be sensitive to all of that. Now, what I'm also going to do here, I'm going to add a null, and I'm going to put, I don't know, 5,000 channels of null. Give it a nice large ID. Now the ID number we're going to use, we're going to put things on that. So let's go back. So now what I need to do is I need to tie my models to those universes that are going to the controller. So in the case of these 3 trees are all going to the controller and they're all chained together. So in this case here, it's set at channel 1. That's an absolute channel. The way I would generally do this is I would say I'm going to put it on a universe number. I'm going to put it on universe 100 channel 1, which is great. And then tree 2, I actually want to chain to the tree 3, I want to chain to the end of tree 2. It's currently chained to the end of the star, so we're going to want to go in and change that. So we're going to change that, and we're going to put that at the end of tree 2. And it's the first channel after the end of tree 2, so that should be a 1 up there. So that's fine. Then this tree here is tree 6, and we're going to want that at the end of tree 3. So again, we don't need to go into the dialog if we don't want to. We can just type it in. This one here is going to be on its own universe. So where are we? Oh, here we are up here. So this particular tree, so you can see up here, stretch this out a little bit. So we've done trees 2, 3, and 5. The last one here ends on universe 116, channel 12. And so for this tree here, I'm going to start this on universe 117. So I'm going to go to my start channel here, and I'm going to put a hash 117:1. And so that starts on a fresh universe after those first trees. Now it's going to finish on universe 118. So my next prop is going to be my tree. I'm going to start him on universe 119:1. He's going to finish. Oh, he uses a lot of universes here. So we've run out of universes here. We're now in that 1000, which is that null prop. So I need to add some more universes on my Falcon. I was too optimistic. So I'm going to double click in and let's make that 50 universes. Save that. And we go back to our layout. Sort it by start channel. And so now tree 5, which was our big tree, is now ending on universe 133. So that's all good. Our polyline's next, so we're going to put him on universe 114.
Keith, can you just explain the difference between using absolute? They just want to know.
Oh, absolute, don't use it. Seriously, don't use it. It's a really bad idea to use absolute, in my opinion. It'll cause you no end of grief in the long run. What have I done here? That's right. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I see why. Yeah, don't use absolute. The way xLights works is xLights creates a really large address space of channels. You can see it here, right? We've allocated 30,500 channels. Absolute would require you to go in and say exactly which channel each prop is on. The problem with this is if I'd gone in and just inserted a bunch of new channels as I did onto my first controller, anything that was in this null block of range of channels would suddenly now have moved and be up on this controller here, which makes no sense at all. There's a video I'm going to point to shortly which goes through how you would set this up properly to avoid those sorts of problems. So I'm going to delete a few things here because we haven't defined everything and it's easier just to delete everything rather than go and deal with all the complexity thereof. What else didn't we define? Okay, for some reason he won't delete. Oh, I'm struggling to delete him. The reason I'm struggling to delete him is he's locked. I was wondering why I was struggling.
Keith,
Oops.
just while you got a second, we've got a few guys asking about how you would define LOR running DMX.
Okay, I can do that. All right. Okay, so let's imagine I did have some LOR running DMX. I'm going to have it, you want to do it hanging off the computer or hanging off something like a Falcon or a xLight? Both are doable. If you were doing it hanging off the computer...
One person says Falcon.
All right, well, the Falcon, it's just an E131. You wouldn't do it any differently. The only thing you would do differently, I don't know, let's create 3 candy canes. Let's make them single channel. So that's using 3 channels. If let's say these were 3 candy canes that you're controlling over DMX on your Falcon, the way you would do that is you would come down here to the controller connection, you would choose DMX, and this would be, let's say, DMX port 2 on the controller. That's how you would associate those 3 with that port on the Falcon, and the Falcon will take care of the protocol conversion. If you wanted to run it off the local computer, you'd add a USB, you'd choose DMX up here. Again, we give this a nice large unique ID. We choose the COM port that it's connected to. We decide how many channels we have. It might be a 16 channel controller, and that's how we would create it. And then if these now were hanging off that particular one, this controller connection becomes not important because we don't support upload to those controllers, but you would need here to make sure that you chose that particular output. Remember, I put 2000 into the ID field here. So 2000 there. So that would associate that particular element with that DMX output and the first channel thereof. Let's imagine it was on the third output of that particular controller. Well, I could come in and change that to be a 3 there. And now that model is on the third output of that DMX controller. I realize that's a whirlwind. I feel the time pressure, but that's how you would set up a DMX output. Now I'm going to delete a couple of things here so that I can get onto the upload and I don't end up with a bunch of errors. I think I've defined controller outputs and universes and everything for this. Start channel. Okay, we haven't set it up for the matrix yet. So we'll have to set the matrix start channel. We'll make him 134:1. And my star's a problem, so it's an easy way to fix that. We'll delete him. All right. And now everyone seems to have a start channel. Everyone is either a universe start channel format or the daisy chaining because the 3 trees are connected together. In the case of these candy canes, we put these there on that other controller, so they're not going to be a problem for us. Everything else is okay here. Actually, let's go back though. Let's go back and put these things onto our Falcon. So my next available universe here is 140. So I'm going to put this on universe 140. I'm still going to keep it on channel 3 on that output. I think, let's put it on channel 1, output 1. And I need to set my controller connection. We'll go back and set that to DMX2. Okay, so that's now hanging off my Falcon on the second DMX port. Everything else has got a controller connection set. So now we're actually ready to do an upload to the Falcon. That's all saved. So let's go and quickly log on to our Falcon so that we can see what it looks like. Actually. So if that's there, I can just right click here and say open the controller and it will open up the controllers page. So here's the Falcon control page. Our ArtNet, it's currently listening for universes 10 through 30. Well, that's not right. We were using 1 through 50 or something. And our output settings for our string ports, this firmware I doubt anyone will have. So it's a slightly newer version of the Falcon firmware, which may cause me some grief. This is currently set up with a whole bunch of expansion boards and everything else, but it's actually only a main board. But we need to set all of this data. We also need to set the serial outputs, set those up correctly, and they're not set up correctly at the moment. Now, by far the easiest way to set it up, and there are some rules that and we've followed all the rules in terms of we've chained models together on outputs. That's generally okay, although we've actually broken some rules because I think you'll find that with 340 pixels, we're getting pretty close to, in fact, I think we've just blown the maximum number of pixels that we can put on an output. So I'm expecting some errors when we try to upload those trees. We haven't run tools check sequence. We probably should have done. Does it tell us that we've got any errors here? Always worth doing. It doesn't say we have any overlapping channels. That's a good thing. It is telling me that I've got a bunch of unused channels. That's okay. It's just going to bloat my file size. So that generally looks pretty good. So let's try uploading it to our controller. Now we do that in a couple of ways. We need to do 2 steps for a Falcon controller. So we right click here, upload to controller, input definition, Falcon. We answer yes to the question. We watch down here in the bottom left-hand corner and it tells us that the upload is complete. If we switch back to our Falcon and we go to our ArtNet configuration, you can see it is listing to universes 100 through 149. So that's all been uploaded and we haven't had to define that manually. It guarantees that I get all my universe sizes correct, etc. If you were to go back into xLights and someone tells you that, well, you know, you shouldn't be using 510 channels, you should be using 512, and you forget to update your controller, you're going to get some problems. But here again, input definition, Falcon, we can upload it again, wait for it to say it was successful. I was holding down the Alt key. I think I hung it by holding down the Alt key. Oh, it's not good. All right, take a timestamp. I crashed it. Oh, okay. Yeah, it crashed. Well, very smart. Okay, so it's 512. We'll upload to the controller, the Falcon. Turns out you can't hold the Alt key down while you do that. Okay, so now if we come back to here and we re-click on this, you can see it's updated it all with 512 channels. Those things do need to be aligned. If they're not aligned, you will get pixel colors being wrong. And there's invariably a post about that every week or two where people have mismatched their sizes. For our string ports here, now everything's in error because this is thinking that there's a universe 10 and there is not a universe 10. So the next thing we need to do is upload our output definition to our Falcon. This takes a little bit longer. It's going to give us some errors. One of those is an error. It shouldn't be saying it's invalid because obviously 1 to 4 is 2 is between 1 and 4. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I've rewritten the Falcon upload in the last release, so bugs are possible. So if we go back now and we bring back up our string port definition, okay, it hasn't uploaded because of that error. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do that upload of that candy cane. So forgive me. Let's try it again. Okay, this is just a warning, so that's okay. It will still do the upload. I come up here to the string port definition. Did it load? Okay, so now I'm confused. Now I'm concerned that the firmware that I'm running is brand new and it's possible that it's broken it. So anyway, so what should happen there is all of the model props, all the props should come up with all their necessary start channels, etc. I'm not sure why it's failing. I'll have to look into that. Like I said, because I downloaded new firmware yesterday, because Dave and I are working on a brand new protocol that's going to make things even easier again. It's quite possible that between Dave and I, we've broken the upload. But that's how the upload is meant to work, and it's meant to upload that panel there, update that panel there with all of the definitions for these props. And in theory, you can then go in and do test mode. So let me move on and touch on a couple of other things. We talked about...
Yep. Can you upload to multiple Falcons at the same time?
No, you have to upload to each controller individually. So you would have multiple lines here. Let's imagine this was a Falcon controller here. You would have to do upload to do it. You can't do them all in one hit, one at a time. Most people don't have hundreds of them. There are a couple of people that do. Someone can suggest it. I might even go and build a bulk upload to multiple controllers. There's no reason why I couldn't do it. It's just never been done. No one's ever asked for it before. In tools, there are a couple other tools up here that are worth noting. The test function is really useful when you're first testing your controller configuration. It basically, it's complaining because I don't have that USB connection in there. It basically lets you go and select universes and start to push data out to them. You can also choose individual models, or even in the case of things that are submodels, individual submodels, and output data to them and check that they're working. So the test function is quite useful. Viewing the log file. Viewing the log file can actually be quite useful. It's a lot of really technical information that you probably don't need to worry about. But in the case of what we just had then, which is our upload was failing, it actually here will give us a lot more information about what it was doing and whereabouts the failures were occurring. So whenever you do an upload, you get lots and lots of detail about what's going on. And even if you can't read it, this is the sort of thing that actually I'm really interested in seeing to debug things. And when xLights crashes, we do get given a copy of that. There's also package log files. So if we ask you to send us your log files, the package log file function is the function that you want to use. What it will do is it will grab your log files, it'll grab your network settings, so your controller configuration, and it will grab your layout. If you happen to have a sequence open, it will grab purely the XML file for the sequence. It won't grab all the videos and all those sorts of things, but it will give us the basics that may allow us to determine exactly what was going on or how your bug was occurring. There is also a package sequence option here. It's not enabled here at the moment because I don't have a sequence open. That's slightly different. That doesn't give us the logs and everything, but when someone gives you a sequence to import onto your show, they're using the packet sequence function, and that makes sure that it does bring all of the videos and the audio and everything else into the one file for you to do the uploading. Export models is kind of useful. That will create a spreadsheet containing a description of all the models that are in your show. I use export models to build myself a spreadsheet that I then use to track my setup and make sure that I tick off everything as I put it together and I test it and get it working. FPP Connect is used for uploading your configuration to your Falcon Pi player. So if you're using the Falcon Pi player as your show player, you want to upload your sequences, you want to upload all of your E131 definitions, etc. FPP Connect is a tool for you, and there's videos available on that. Download sequences and lyrics. There's not a huge number here, and we do slowly add them, but there's a bunch of sequences that are freely downloadable from the Google Drive, and they're all listed in here. You can go and choose one of these and download them and import them. And if you're involved in the Singing Faces project, this is also where you can go to download the lyric tracks for a particular sequence. So that's also in the tools menu. As you get closer to showtime and you're making last minute tweaks on your layout, etc., you may find yourself making a tweak to something here in the layout, and you then need to go back and re-prepare all of your sequences. Basically, you need to load each one up and re-render them to make sure that they're correct. The batch render tool is a wonderful tool for that, because what it does is it lets you go in and basically go through a whole bunch of sequences and re-render them and save them and updates your FSCQ file. I use that a lot in late November, early December to get my sequence ready. And that's about it. You probably don't have the crash xLights function in your version, but I do. That's the tools. Hang on, just a couple of other things I want to go through. I'm quite conscious of time. Couple of things around other resources. Obviously, everyone's in the Zoom call. You managed to find us today. This Zoom call is generally available 24/7. Commonly, people in here The US folks are typically here in most evenings, very much on Wednesday. It's a very busy place on a Wednesday night, but you'll also commonly find people in here on the evening or late afternoon on the weekend and Friday night. In Australia, Friday night, there's usually a bit of a crowd in here on a Friday night, but generally during the day on the weekend, you'll often find there's a few people hanging around in here as well, overlapping with the American time zones. The 101 manual, if you've never seen the 101 manual, you want to go and get yourself over to Oz Christmas Lighting, to their forums. You will need to sign up for their forums, but there is the 101 manual here. It's definitely worth downloading. Click the download link here. This is the best written introduction to pixels that I know of. It will go through all the elements. It is not xLights specific. We rate a mention along with a bunch of other sequences, but it'll go through power and power injection and controllers and what those damn IP6 ratings actually mean. There's a huge amount of information in here. If you've never downloaded and looked at this manual and you're new to the hobby, this is the first thing you should be doing right now, but not right now, you're listening to me. But a huge resource. Obviously, the Nutcracker forum, which you can find by going to either xlights.org or you can go straight to nutcracker123.com/forum. A little bit more organized information. The traffic is nowhere near as high as you get on the Facebook page, etc. But you'll generally get quality responses here. Gil and I answer most questions that appear on this page, whereas Facebook, it's a lot more variable. And xlights.org. There is the tip of the day stuff. So you click on the View All 100. These were put together late last year, and there's 100 different tips here. So they're a year old. Some of them will be a little bit out of date, but not many of them. Whole bunch of random tips of the day telling you how to do things. If you've never seen these before, I think they're worth a quick read through. Also on xlights.org, sorry, I don't know what I did then. Also on xlights.org is the videos page. The videos page has a massive number of videos. It's well over 150 now, I think. Pretty much all on either xLights or very closely related topics, and there's a few things here that I would draw your attention to. I'm going to draw your attention to a couple of videos as well as some particular people that are worthwhile following. I'll start with Jeff. This is Jeff here from Can a Spade a Christmas. Jeff makes a whole series of videos. He generally puts out one a week or one every couple of weeks. His video production and quality and everything is really high. He's a really nice guy. He's a really funny guy, and his videos are really quite entertaining. Definitely worthwhile subscribing to his channel and watching his video. He covers a whole bunch of things. It tends to be on the basic end of things, but it also means that it tends to be quite consumable. His videos are typically 10 to 15 minutes long, and so quite consumable. There are some other videos. The popular videos, there's a pretty good sign. Importing an xLights sequence. I haven't had a chance today to show you how to import a sequence. This video is the one you're going to want to watch if you're doing importing of a purchase sequence or one of the free sequences. If you're doing AC light sequencing, I didn't manage to get into AC lights mode, but this video here will go through chapter and verse, how to use the AC toolbar and do sequencing much more like you're used to in something like an S4 or something like that. Cleaning up your xLights setup and layout, you know, I've been pretty emphatic that the right way to do start channels is to use Universe and Start Channel. If you're using Absolute and you want to switch over, this is the video that will help you understand why I recommend Universe and Start Channel and how to actually do the transition.
Keith, are you trying to show your screen because we only see your video right now?
Oh, really? Oh, I think I lost. Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, why did yes, I think it dropped. I think that's what the flash was. I saw the flash, but I didn't see what it was. Sorry about that. Sorry, I've just been rattling through the video. So this was the importing sequence. This is the xLights video. This is cleaning up your layout, setting your start channels appropriately. Definitely worth a watch. They're very focused. They go into one topic alone, so they don't quite go for as long as this session has done, and they tend to focus on the one topic. Configuring Falcon controllers from xLights. So this is something that goes through the whole upload process. That's also worth looking at. There's a whole series of release update videos. You can see them here. They come out every, I don't know, between every 2 weeks and a month or so. Definitely worthwhile flicking through. I know they go for about half an hour, which can be a bit much to go through, but so much comes out in each release or every 3 or 4 releases that it does take a while to get through everything, but I do go through every feature change in those videos. There's an xSchedule walkthrough video that, hang on. This xSchedule walkthrough and Q&A video. This is definitely worthwhile looking at if you're looking at using the scheduler. We haven't had a chance to go through that today. I think if you come down to popular here, you get an expanded list. And so the xSchedule video, there it is there, easy to find. E131 Networks is a mini video that I did, this one down here. This one here talks about how to connect your show network up. It talks about subnets. It talks about bridging through your Falcon, all of that sort of stuff. If you're struggling to get your network set up, I would start with this video. There are some others around, but I'd start there. This one here is kind of hard to find. This is an X Essentials video. The whole X Essentials sequence is really good, but I would strongly recommend RGB Basics and Setup Tab Part 2. In it, Jonathan goes through the best explanation I've ever seen of universes and what universes are and how to think about them. He uses a stadium seating example, which for me was really quite the best way I've heard someone of explaining something, a concept that's quite difficult for newcomers to get. Definitely worthwhile looking that one up. The X Essentials, there's a whole bunch of these X Essential videos here. You can see them because they've got the quite distinctive front page. These have been running all year. There's been a whole bunch of presenters on a whole bunch of topics. Not all of them are xLights related. In fact, I would suggest barely a third of them are xLights related. The others are you know, not even Christmas related. Some of them are Halloween, some of them are animatronics, video projection. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. They're not all there. They're a little bit behind in getting some of those up onto the site. I'm sure they'll get there eventually. For the ones that aren't here, you probably will have to hunt down the Facebook video, because I think Ed's been leaving the Facebook video up until it did get onto this particular page. And the other ones I talk about is the Oz Christmas Lighting YouTube channel is also worth a look at. The ACL, here it is here. The ACL guys, not only do they webcast their minis, typically in this Zoom session, but they also record particularly the Sydney Mini and the Adelaide Mini. And just in the last few days, the 2018 Adelaide Mini videos have started to appear online. There's really high video production qualities, particularly in the Adelaide ones. Ryan does an awesome job of blending together the screen projection and the video of the people doing the presentations. So these are definitely worthwhile taking a look at. So yeah. So I guess at the end of the day, look, I'm kidding myself if I think that this is going to solve all of your problems. Your xLights has got so much in it, and there is so much diversity in how you all set up your displays. I'm sure you're all going to have your own challenges. You know, you are going to have issues, everyone does, and I suggest that you do reach out to the community. The thing that to me sets xLights apart from all the other sequences is not just the sequencer itself. You know, I think it's pretty good. I think we've gone to a lot of trouble to automate a lot of very mundane activities, but the community is the thing that makes the biggest difference with xLights. There's an awesome community out there, and everyone's willing to help. Just take the time to be really clear about the question that you're asking and share the necessary information. Just saying, look, I can't get my lights to work is not a very useful risk or to put up on the forums, etc. You need to get specific, show the controller configuration pages, show your xLight setup, etc., so that people can use it. Use check sequence. Check sequence is the aggregated knowledge of all of the developers and all of the problems that we've seen on the various forums, where we've gone through and said, can we detect that problem? Because we can't always stop the problem from occurring. There's a lot of flexibility in xLights. That's deliberate. It's there because there's a lot of people that set their shows up very different ways. But check sequence is optimized to look for the common mistakes that that people will make. And look, you know, if you're really stuck, post in the Facebook page. Say, hey, can someone jump into Zoom and help me out with something? And I've never seen people not get help if they're willing to make the time. But just make sure that you're actually available. People get frustrated when someone asks for help and then they come back and say, oh, I'll be home in 3 hours. Well, you know, maybe you should ask for help in 3 hours when you're home so people can jump in and help you out. The one thing I would suggest you don't do is don't message the developers directly if you've got a problem. Ask the Facebook group. I mean, there are times when it is okay. I mean, I answer questions that are asked of me directly, but I will also point out the fact that 9 times out of 10, you could just send it to the forum. You'd get a much faster answer than asking me directly. If you've got a crash or something and you know you need me, etc., you definitely want to, yeah, you can definitely reach out to me and I'll step in and try and solve your problem and fix the bug. And we usually get the bug fixes out at the next release.